I'll hand it over to you.
Cool.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome to Spiritual Technologies. This is our weekly Bhagavad Gita study class. And today we've got a very special guest, Mother Vraja Lila, who's been a Bhakti Yogi, practicing Bhakti Yogi for over 40 years. She's helped establish ISKCON centers in Central America and Africa. And she's currently residing in a farm in Washington, D.C., and she's got a lot of interests alongside obviously being a Bhakti Yogi. So I'm going to hand over to Mother Lila, Mother Vraja Lila, who's going to give a little introduction, I'm sure more than what a better one than I just did now, and then start us off with a little kirtan, and then we will be reading from chapter 8, verse 1 to 4 today. So Hare Krishna, the floor is all yours, Mother.
Haribol, thank you so very much. I'm grateful to everyone that's on the call and very thankful that I can be with you, all of you today. Well, I think what you did, the introduction is wonderful. I've, been a devotee for some time, and I live in Gita Nagari, which is in Pennsylvania. Have lived in Washington, D.C. We do have a community in Washington, D.C. I'm a disciple of Bhaktitirtha Maharaj, and and my favorite thing to do, which is to talk to devotees and help devotees through their conflicts. And that's my profession. That's what I do. That's my field. I'm a communicator, and I work with conflict technologies. So Radha Damodara, Radha Damodara, Shirade. Radha Damodara, Radha Damodara, Shirade. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya, Gurudev, 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 Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Gurudev, Jaya. Namo Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Vastabhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini. Nirvishesha Sanyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Namo Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Vastabhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane. Namaste Krishna Vidaya Prabhupada Shri Tatmane Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane. Hari Hari. Again, thank you so much for inviting me. I learned we're reading from the 8th chapter, Attaining the Supreme. Texts 1 through 4. And I'll just chant Om Namo Bhagavate, and then I'm going to request someone to read the verse. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So if you would like to read
I can read the first, and then I'll get a volunteer to read the next, I'm sure. So the first verse is, Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. Purport. In this chapter, Lord Krishna answers different questions from Arjuna, beginning with, what's Brahman? The Lord also explains karma, fruitive activities, devotional service and yoga principles, and devotional service in its pure form. The Srimad Bhagavatam explains that supreme absolute truth is known as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In addition, the living entity, the individual soul, is also called Brahman. Arjuna also inquires about Atma, which refers to body, soul, and mind. According to the Vedic dictionary, Atma refers to mind, soul, body, and senses also. Arjuna has addressed the Supreme Lord as Purushottama, Supreme Person, which means that he was putting these questions not simply to a friend, but to a Supreme Person, knowing him to be the Supreme Authority, able to give definitive answers.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to do the Sanskrit. Arjuna vacha kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam kim karma purushottama adhibhutam champ kim proktam adhidaivam kim uchate. Om gana timirandasya gana gana shalakaya chakshuromanitam yena tasmai shri gurve namaha. So this chapter, chapter 8, is really beautiful because this chapter explains to us in details about dying, the ultimate technology, the ultimate spiritual technology that we need to learn is how to leave this body and what to do when that time comes. And so Arjuna is going to ask a series of questions that will eventually lead to that question. Well, he asks 8 questions, and the last question is this one that the whole chapter, the entire 8th chapter addresses, and that's what happens at the time of death. So what's important in this text 1, is that Arjuna is questioning. He's asking questions, and that's an important spiritual technology, to be able to understand that it is correct, it is right, it is actually our natural dharma to ask questions when we are introduced in spiritual environments. Arjuna is not, he throughout the Bhagavad Gita, we can see that he's not someone that is just accepting, even though him and Krishna, they're such close friends. At the same time, though, he is very much aware that he needs to understand things before he acts on them. And so Arjuna, he's not following blindly. That's sometimes something that as spiritualists, especially when we're in the beginning of our search, we may inquire from persons, especially in our families or, people that maybe we think of it spiritual things, and they may not necessarily have the answer. And so when they don't have the answer to our spiritual questions, then we may become very disillusioned, and we may decide, well, that's not something I really want to pursue, because most of the people that are elders, they don't even know, they don't understand. And so two important points in this first text is it's important to be able to ask questions, at the same time asking questions from the right source. That is really important for someone that's wanting to understand spiritual life. So here Krishna is saying in this text, Arjuna is inquiring, so what is Brahman? And what is the self, and what are fruitive activities? And so Arjuna is wanting to know, what is Brahman? Is it, he asked Krishna, why is this? Is it referring to fruitive activities? And what is it referring to, the soul, the self? What is it actually? And he wants to understand what this Brahman, this understanding of the soul, what is it? Who is it? What is it? And so here, Krishna is going to answer these questions in text 3 and 4. And so Arjuna is asking these questions specifically because he wants to go deeper. He wants to understand. Krishna in the previous chapter is speaking, sharing with him about what it takes to really become absorbed in spiritual life. And so Arjuna now in this text, there are some words that Krishna mentions in the last chapter that Arjuna is a little bit confused about, and he wants to understand more. more about that. So Arjuna, the point of Arjuna asking questions is relevant to the theme of your group, which is spiritual technologies, that in order for one to really understand Krishna, in order for one to have some understanding about Krishna, one has to develop the right mindset, so to speak. And so there is a way to ask questions, and we also need to know who we ask questions from. So in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains how to ask questions. And so in that verse, I believe it's the 434, it says, Tadvidi paripatena paripashena sevaya upadeshanti te gyanam gyananastatvadarshinaha. So that verse helps us to understand, how do we ask questions? In what mood do we ask these questions? And so that verse explains to us that we need to learn, we need to try to learn these truths from a spiritual teacher, from a spiritual master. And so in this first verse, Arjuna is inquiring from Krishna. I believe he calls Krishna somewhere in this verse. Yeah, he addresses Krishna as the Supreme Lord, Purushottama. So he's not speaking to Krishna as a friend in this verse. He knows, he understands that Krishna is the Supreme Lord. At this point, he's fully aware. And Arjuna, as we know, he's playing a role. And so even in where we are now, that he's addressing Krishna as Purushottam, this supreme person, he's showing us this distinction that in previous texts, he was asking questions of Krishna, and he's having conversations with Krishna as a friend. And now it's shifted. It's shifted from 7. So here we are in 8, and he's like, okay, this is the Supreme Lord. So now his whole mood has changed, Arjuna's whole mood, because now he's understanding that this source is the personality of Godhead himself. And so this is an example for us in terms of asking questions. It's important to know how to ask questions. So in that verse, as we said, Tadvidi, that verse that's so dear to everyone that's a practitioner of bhakti, this verse, because it helps us to understand the submissive mood that one needs to have in order to get our questions answered, and also just in how we inquire. So Arjuna has the submissive mood with Krishna at this point in this verse, and he's requesting him to explain these things to me. I don't understand. I'm a little bit confused about it. And so here we see that in the next couple of verses, Krishna is going to explain in 3rd and 4th verses. So what's important in this verse is understanding the mood of asking questions. The questions are actually to be asked in parampara, right? So this is a cyclic succession where the knowledge is being passed down from Krishna himself. And in the Bhagavad Gita, that's also explained in, I think it's in, where is that? That's chapter 4. It's also in chapter 4. And that, in this chapter, Krishna says, again, he's explaining that Krishna says, he's saying to Arjuna in the text, in order to validate who he is, that he is the Supreme Personality. He says, Imam Vishvate Yogam. This is translated into, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, Vivashwan. And Vivashwan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ishvaku. So why is that verse important? Why there's a couple of verses. The next one is the supreme science was thus received through the chain of the cyclic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. However, in due course of time, that succession was broken, and therefore the science, as it is, appears to be lost. So this is why, so the importance of why are those verses, why did I refer to those verses? Because those verses validate why Arjuna is calling Krishna Purushottama, because he's helping us to understand from this verse, from these verses, that Krishna is the personality, that's the beginning of the disciplic succession. And so therefore, we all need to hear from this line in disciplic succession. Anyone that's pursuing bhakti, it's important to know disciplic succession, and it's important to know the mood that we inquire. How do we inquire? And that's explained in that 434, that Tadvidi verse. So I wanted now to open up to you, because my way of connecting, if you will, with persons that are interested in the Bhagavad Gita is to have interactive. And I see Dylan, he kind of just went away. So Dylan, don't worry, I'm not gonna call anybody out. We're just this is just for us to share what was important for you in this verse so far. Like, what is there anything that stands out for you in this first verse?
So, Mother, I can't see anybody posted any questions on the chat, but those of us that have, videos on, just ping it in the chat or raise your hands. I'll give people a couple of seconds to think of really interesting questions, Mother. Honestly, these lot, the questions they ask usually. Oh, Sharadia, speaking of questions. So Sharadia's got a question for us. She says, how do we balance being submissive?
Nice question. Nice point. Submissive comes from the more we hear, by hearing, and by connecting deeper with the knowledge that's available for us in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and say Chaitanya Charitamrita, wherever we're receiving the knowledge. And independent, okay, and when we ask questions, okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the question is, how do we maintain a submissive mood? And the second part of that question?
So how do we balance being submissive and independent when we ask questions to our spiritual teachers? So how you balance being submissive whilst, I suppose, maintaining your individuality and independence?
Okay, so that's a two-part question. First of all, when we ask questions of the spiritual teachers, the spiritual teacher needs to be in the consciousness that they're representing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that whatever answers that they're given is answers that's already been given by the Supreme Lord. It's not that they're concocting some answers themselves. So they need to be, the person that is giving the knowledge need to be in a very humble state of mind in sharing the knowledge. Now, the person that is receiving the knowledge and requesting having some inquiry, that person can be balanced in their consciousness by first of all having some faith and some trust in the teacher. That's very important. And then secondly, that they have a sincere desire to really want to learn. In these verses that we are sharing, that we're talking about today, Arjuna was very sincere in his inquiry from Krishna. He, in the second verse, we'll learn how he had some doubts. And because of those doubts, this is why he posed these questions to Krishna. So if we are sincere in our inquiry, and if the person that is answering our inquiry is humble and understanding that they are simply a via medium from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then even if in our conditioning, we may not sound very submissive. That person that is giving us the knowledge will not actually, they will hear whatever we ask in a way that they're hearing it, that we are being submissive. So it's just like Krishna now, he's hearing from Arjuna, and Arjuna will express some doubts. Krishna didn't take that like personal. Krishna is still answering his questions. And so that balance of submissiveness comes from hearing. As we hear, we become more purified from our material conditioning of not trusting, not having faith. All of our kind of, challenging mood starts being minimized, because we start having more trust in, first of all, the teacher or the mentor or whomever, and then we start understanding, and by hearing the philosophy, we start really, having more faith in the philosophy, in the teachings of Krishna, and especially this Bhagavad Gita. This Bhagavad Gita is so wonderful, because Arjuna, he had to balance in so many different places, even in the very beginning, when he was saying, no, I'm not going to fight. No, I'm not doing it. And Krishna had, Krishna was just like, okay, Haribo. Now, he's a little chill, just listening to him, like, okay, I'm gonna hear this, And he had so much empathy for Arjuna when Arjuna was not being submissive. So it's not to say that, to think that not being submissive is something wrong with me. I mean, I don't want to go into my counseling here in this class. However, if a person is not submissive, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. Actually, sometimes when a person is not submissive, they're very sincere. It really means a lot to them to be able to understand very deeply whatever it is that they're inquiring about. I hope that answered your question.
I hope it did, Shiradi, and please do feel free to come back if you have any follow-up questions. The one other question I had that's very related to that, Mother, I think when you say submission, be submissive, I think isn't the word we're looking for humble? Because I think in modern world, being submissive has a different sort of connotation. I think it could ruffle a few feathers. I don't know.
Yes, B, that's everything changes, right? And even language, there's so much of language that impacts people in different ways. You're absolutely right about that. Submissive is the translation from the Sanskrit that's there in the scriptures. And so when we understand that being submissive is non-different from being humble, it's actually the same. When we're humble, then we have a mood of really caring and wanting to know and wanting to learn, and that could be labeled as submissive. But you're so correct. However, you're so correct about labeling. And so, yes, in order to hear, we want to develop this humble consciousness, this humble mood, and that means hearing with a certain kind of attentiveness. Yeah. How can we?
Mother, we also have a question from Dylan. Dylan, do you want to read it for us? You're such a good, usually good at asking questions. Go on.
Hare Krishna, everyone.
Haribo.
So I had a question. You know how the translation says, what are the demigods? So my question is, what are the demigods? And why do they provide material needs if they're technically not allowed? Because we all know that this is the mode of ignorance and passion, to ask God, oh God, please give me a car, oh please give me money, make me rich. Asking for these material needs is technically the mode of ignorance and passion, but we see that in a lot of cases, people would go to demigods to ask this. Like, you won't see people asking Lord Krishna, oh Lord Krishna, please make me rich, please give me a big house, make me live there, get me a private jet. But when it comes to demigods, it's always like for blackmailing God, or if you do this, I will do that. If you give me a big house, I will fast 7 days a week. If I get this, I will become vegetarian. Like, a lot of times I feel like with demigods, with blackmail, why is it like this? And why do demigods allow it if they know that under Krishna's will, this is not technically allowed?
So, Dylan, that is such a beautiful and packed question. And you know, Krishna does answer this question in text 4. So I will give a little hint of this, and then when we get to text 4, you'll hear Krishna's answer. So my little hint is that, you know, Krishna is so amazingly kind. He's so kind. You know, he gives us free will and free choices, right? And so there's so many different sections of the Vedas. And there's a section of the Vedas called the Karma Kanda section. The Karma Kanda section is specifically for people, like you said, that are asking for things, that want things, and you know, that's their whole desire is based on I, me, mine, what I can get. And so Krishna, being so kind, he allows his representatives who acts in those roles of demigods to be able to give people these different things that they want. Right? And then at some point in a person's life, they will come to a place where they realize, okay, I have everything. I don't need anything. What's the next thing? And what's the next thing? And eventually these persons will come to the Supreme Lord. Now, the question about why does Krishna let the demigods do this, or why even the demigods do this? This is their role. It's just like, you're in England, Dylan? Okay, that's right. Everybody's from London here, most people. So just like in England, there's a little bit of the system there. I think I know a little bit. Oh, you're from Mauritius. How wonderful. So moved there in 2017 to Mauritius? Oh, moved to America. Okay. Okay, moved to London. So in Mauritius, you have a government, and the government, you know, they have many different departments. And the department, depending on what the department is, there may be a hospitality department, for example, in your country. And that hospitality department is to enable people to be cared for, right? There's somebody that's doing that. They're in charge of doing that hospitality. And so that personality, their service is to render, is to give, is to make sure that people are nicely cared for when they come to your country, go to Mauritius. And I remember my spiritual master, Bhakti Tirthamaraj, would go to Mauritius all the time. He loved going there. Because actually it's a fact, there's such hospitality there. And so that person, that's their role, that's their service. So Krishna cares about us so much that he recognizes that we're going to need hospitality in this material world. So he arranges for people to care for us, give us a kind of hospitality that's not really the utmost of hospitality, right? It's not it's not the topmost hospitality. It's just like a person can come into your country and they can get some kind of hospitality. However, if they get to meet your prime minister or whatever, then they really get some more hospitality. That's like real hospitality. So this is kind of just a little off the top of me sharing. However, Krishna will answer that to Arjuna in text 4. Okay.
Thank you, Mother. There's another question which is related to the point about asking questions. So Gauri Gopika Devidasi is asking this question where she goes, how can we know who is a proper person to ask our questions to, with whom to connect, and from whom we will be able to accept instructions?
Such a beautiful question. Yes, which is why it's important as bhakti yogis to understand the parampara system. So these authorities that are representative of Krishna, these personalities that are representing the words of Krishna, so to speak, or the word or the knowledge that Krishna wants us to have, they come in a disciplic succession. And that's disciplic succession for us at this particular time is Srila Prabhupada. And so this is Bhagavad Gita is translated by Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada has some representatives that are also speaking the same message that Srila Prabhupada is speaking. Srila Prabhupada is speaking the same message his spiritual master is speaking, his spiritual teacher, all the way back to Krishna. So if we want to receive proper knowledge, then it's important on our journey to really find this where will we be able to receive this proper knowledge. And so this word parampara, disciplic succession, is very, very important for someone that's a seeker. Where will I get the truth, the absolute truth from? Which is why Srila Prabhupada, he wrote this book, the Bhagavad Gita, as it is. There are over 400 translations of Bhagavad Gita all over the world. And, just so many different translations of Bhagavad Gita. However, Bhagavad Gita as it is directly the words that's spoken by Krishna. And here we have it in the Bhagavad Gita, exactly as it was spoken. So there, as a person that's journeying on bhakti, then within the community of bhakti yogis, you will find those persons that are direct representatives of Krishna's words. So that's important.
Thank you, Mother. And we also had a similar comment, a comment that's related to it on Facebook from Sharma Villabadas. He says, Hare Krishna Mataji, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that there are only 4 authentic sampradayas, Sri Rudra Kumara and our line Brahma Gaudiya. Do you think that any of them are better than any of the other lines?
That language of good, better, best, I try personally not to stay away from that language, because from what I understand in my years of trying to be a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga, I understand that there are different sampradayas that are giving knowledge to people for where they are in their evolution of becoming eventually bhakti yogis. And so the different sampradayas, they are also giving knowledge about Krishna. Some are given from what this verse is speaking, from the knowledge about Brahman. Some are giving knowledge about Paramatma. And as far as our sampradaya, we are understanding knowledge about Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And so as far as the other sampradayas, I don't know enough to be able to say that it's one is better than the other. I do know that if you want to know about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then you will study from the sampradaya of Bhakti Yoga. You will study from, from that, the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, if we want to learn about Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I hope that answers the question, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mother. So I can't see any other questions. So shall we get on to the next text? And Dylan's very kindly volunteered to read the text for us. So we're next reading chapter 8, verse number 2.
Yes. Attaining the Supreme, text 2. I'm going to go straight with a translation, guys.
Okay.
How does this Lord of sacrifice live in the body, and in which part does he live? O Madhusudana, and how can those engaged in devotional service know due at the time of death. Purport. The Lord of Sacrifice accepts Indra and Vishnu. Vishnu is the chief of the primal demigods, including Brahma and Shiva. And Indra is the chief of the administrative demigods. Both Indra and Vishnu are worshipped by yajna performances. But here, Arjuna asks, who is actually the Lord of yajna, sacrifice? And how is the Lord residing within the body of a living entity? Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana because Krishna once killed a demon named Madhu. Actually, these questions, which are of the nature of doubts, should not have arisen in the mind of Arjuna because Arjuna is a Krishna conscious devotee. Therefore, these doubts are like demons. Since Krishna is so expert in killing demons, Arjuna here addresses him as Madhusudana so that Krishna might kill the demoniac doubts that arise in Arjuna's mind. And I'm trying to change slides. Now the word prayana kali is in this verse is very significant because whatever we do in life will be tested at the time of death. Arjuna fears that at the time of death, those who are in Krishna consciousness will forget the Supreme Lord because at such a time, body functions are disrupted and the mind may be in a panic-stricken state. Therefore, Maharaja Kulasekara, a great devotee, prays, "My dear Lord, may I die immediately now, but I'm healthy so that the swan of my mind may enter into the stem of thy lotus feet." This metaphor is used because the swan often takes pleasure in entering the stem of the lotus leaf. Similarly, the mind of a pure devotee is drawn to the lotus feet of the Lord. Maharaja Kalusekara fears that at the moment of death, his throat will be so choked up that he will not be able to chant the holy names. So it is better to die immediately. Arjuna questions how one's mind can remain fixed on Krishna's lotus feet at such times.
Wow, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dylan.
Okay, thank you so much. So here's the second part of the question, and something that, Arjuna now he's expressing some doubts. This is kind of interesting because in the previous chapter, I'm guessing that you have been studying this Bhagavad Gita and you have completed studying chapter 7, yes? Is that right? Okay. So in text 29 of the 7th chapter, Krishna, he was explaining that intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age, death, death, take refuge in me in devotional service. Actually, Brahman, because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. And so here, it's interesting that Arjuna, after Krishna has said that in the 29th verse, Arjuna is having some doubts. So, Krishna told him before in text 29, he gave him this answer of who he was, who he is. And still Arjuna is saying, well, okay, I'm still a little bit wanting to know more. He heard Krishna in chapter 7. At the same time, he wasn't fully accepting. You know how you can hear something and then you're still kind of cloudy about it. The clarity may not be there. And so this brings up doubts. So this text number 2 is addressing the doubts of Arjuna, and he's not comfortable with these doubts. It's just like when we start practicing bhakti, and then all of a sudden we start seeing so many different things that in the scriptures that may totally rock our world. Like one of the things I remember that rocked my world when I first started the Bhagavad Gita was when I got to the place that says women are less intelligent. It really rocked my world because, I was very conditioned in the material world to thinking that because I had, done this school or that school or have this degree or that degree or whatever, that how is that possible? How could like, whoa, there's a stick, I'm getting stuck here. And so Arjuna, this is one of those places where Arjuna is at a little bit where he's like, okay, well, you said all those things, but actually, who's the Lord of sacrifice anyway? And how does he live in the body? Well, how do I understand this? And so he's asking him about, can he be Indra? Can Indra be the Lord of sacrifice? Is it Vishnu? And how are they worshipped? What is this? What is all of this? So he wants to know who's actually the Lord of sacrifice here. And so this, he's Krishna. Arjuna is addressing Krishna's Madhusudan because Krishna had killed this demon Madhu, which is a demon that represents doubts. And so Arjuna now is also experiencing these doubts. And so he's saying, just like you killed that demon Madhu, can you please kill these demons that's in my own head? Because I'm not getting this for whatever the reasons are. I want to get it. I want to understand it, but it's not clear. And I'm really a little bit kind of unsure about what you're saying. And so here is one of the reasons why we ask questions, because we do have doubts at times, with our teachings, because we are coming from a background, most of us, where everything that we learned was totally upside down, totally in a different way. And so now Arjuna is just openly opening his heart to Krishna. And Krishna is not saying, how could you doubt this philosophy? How could you doubt what I said? Didn't I just tell you in text 29, in chapter 7, didn't I just tell you who I am and what I do and how to understand me? And now why are you, why are you asking me this? No, Krishna didn't do that. He just gonna explain to Arjuna about these questions that Arjuna is having. And he's also, speaking to him in a way of care, of love, of okay, I need to help Arjuna to understand this, because Arjuna is going to be that personality that's going to impact millions of people and generations to come. And so therefore he had to, Krishna is just so kind to be able to help Arjuna to understand these different questions. Also, one other point is Arjuna is asking, and how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? And that's the big question that is this whole chapter, as I shared earlier. This is going to be discussed during this question. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the questions also that's coming up, so I'll just wait to answer them. I'll finish with this, and then what's here, that Srila Prabhupada is explaining here that this word prayana kale in this verse is significant, because whatever we do in life will be tested at the time of death. And so Arjuna is anxious to know. He wants to know, how do I engage, myself? I mean, what's going to happen once I die anyway? And what should I do? What should be my final thoughts? How should I position myself at that final time of death, that final moment? And then Prabhupada is sharing the reason Arjuna is asking these questions is because the body gets disrupted at the time of death. And, I definitely can share that with you because, my husband and I, we took care of my spiritual master before he left his body for 1 year. And so we were fully present to what happens to the body before the soul leaves the body. And so the personality that Arjuna refers to in this text is Maharaj Katvanga. this great personality, Maharaj Kulashekhar, he prays that now that he's healthy, it is better for him to die now, because what's going to happen, much more difficult it becomes, as he gets older. And so Prabhupada mentions here about this metaphor that's used. And this metaphor, he says, is by Maharaj Kulashekhar about the swan. He says the metaphor is used because the swan, a bird of the water, takes pleasure in digging into the lotus flowers. And Maharaj Kulashekhar is saying, my mind, he says, now my mind is undisturbed, because I'm kind of younger, and he has faith in Krishna. He says, and I'm healthy. However, if I should die immediately, because we don't know when we're going to die, right? We can die at any time. I mean, just recently, a young girl here, she was in her 20s, and she just left her body of cancer in America. So death can come at any moment. And so Maharaj Kulashekhar is sharing, like, how can I just stay engaged in devotional service? And he says, because if I wait for a natural death, then he don't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what will happen with a natural death, and that is a fact. I mean, when people are ready to die, the body does go through all kinds of different challenges, different challenges. So Queen Kulashekar's prayers are important for us with understanding this verse, because his prayers are reflecting the question that Arjuna is asking about what's going to happen at the time of death. If somebody's engaged in devotional service, then how can they know you at the time of death? How will they know you? Because at the time of death, we say, chant Hare Krishna throughout our lives, and it's important. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He so kindly gave us the holy names to chant. However, there is a time, there is a period when the dying process where a person cannot chant. They're not able to chant. So how then do the subtle body remember the chanting if they hadn't been doing it? And this is the point that's being made, that, Arjuna is asking these questions because he really wants to understand the difference between what happens on our gross body and our subtle body. So, is there someone that has I saw some questions coming up, so maybe I can just take some questions from this verse.
Yes, Mother. So there were two questions. I'll just read it out loud, just because there are people listening on Facebook that can't really see the questions. So the first one's from Sharada. She's asking the question, what is the source of doubts which at times challenge our faith?
What is the source of doubt?
Yes. So what's the source of doubt which at times challenge our faith? So I suppose, where does doubt come from is the crux of the question.
Yes. Yeah, so Krishna explains that our doubts come from our desires to enjoy separately from him. I was sharing earlier about the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. And so many people are conditioned to reading those portions of the Vedas, and they develop attachments for the demigods from reading those sections of the Vedas. And so if we have been conditioned like that, let's say our parents taught us about, demigod worship, or let's say we come from families where we're very attached to material activities, all of these contribute to the doubts that goes on within us when we come to understanding bhakti. Because bhakti is a process of surrender, and it's difficult. it's easy, Prabhupada said. On one hand, we can do it in 18 days. However, for most of us, because our material conditioning is so dense, we've spent so many lifetimes just wanting to enjoy separate from Krishna. So that those seeds of material enjoyment, those seeds of material desires is what separates us from having strong faith and strong commitment often to the process of surrender, because we want to enjoy material desires, material life. That's what we're used to. That's what we know. And so to get away from that is really can only happen by the practice of bhakti on a daily basis, So to the degree that we immerse ourselves in the practice of bhakti, to that degree, our faith will be strong. To the degree that we don't immerse ourselves in the process of bhakti, to that degree, we're going to have weak faith. To that degree, we'll be challenged with our faith because we'll be taking shelter of material energy.
Thank you, Mother. That was a lovely answer. Dylan, I take it you have a question. Would you like to unmute yourself, please? We can't hear you. You're on mute. Dylan, you're on mute.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Horrible. So I had a question. You know how in this purple, they say it's Siva. Is Siva Lord Shiva? Or are these two different gods or personalities?
In the purport, I'm sorry, it says
It's
something about
SIVA, but is that the same as Lord Shiva, which is SHIVA?
Yes, it's sometimes it's spelled SHIVA and sometimes SIVA, but this is, Brahma, Shiva, and Indra. They are the chief administrative demigods. It's the same Shiva.
Oh,
Mm-hmm. And Shiva, he's actually the head of the demigods. Well, yes, he's kind of different from the demigods in one sense, because he's very close actually to Lord Vishnu. However, he is playing that role of demigod of a demigod. Yes.
I had a question because a lot of times my Hindu friends ask me to explain it to them, and I kind of feel like it's a bit of an awkward situation for me because I don't like to talk about something I don't know. So I like to know my topic and then go around and spread it, because I feel like it's also blasphemy to just say random things if you don't know what you're talking about. But a lot of times they tell me that in Hinduism, so regardless of you being like a Lord Shiva devotee, a Lord Vishnu devotee, a Hare Krishna, they say that there's like a holy trinity where there's Lord Vishnu, Lord Brahma, and Lord Shiva. But each of them claim that, like for example, some will say, Lord Shiva is, especially in Mauritius, if you go to any temple in Mauritius, they will have like a massive Lord Shiva statue, because they will tell you that Lord Shiva is the main. But if you look at, for example, a Hare Krishna, they will tell you that Lord Vishnu is the main. But if you go to India, in some temples, they will say that Lord Brahma is the main. And they will try to justify it, saying that Lord Brahma created the world, so he is the supreme, while they will tell you, but Lord Shiva destroyed it and everything and created the new world, while Lord Vishnu maintained peace. So how would you explain that in a simple way, so that if one day I get asked, I can transmit a very easy summary of this, please?
Yes, such interesting questions, Dilan. Thank you so much. Yeah, in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains, he says himself, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. I am the source. This is Krishna. This is about the 10th chapter, 8th verse. He says, everything emanates from me. Everything comes from me. The wise who perfectly knows this. So one has to become wise first to understand this. Those persons engage in my devotional service. So how do we become wise? By engaging in devotional service, which are really two very important aspects of engaging in devotional service is hearing and chanting. Just like we're doing now, we're hearing and chanting. So if we engage in devotional service, knowing that Krishna is the source of all the spiritual and material worlds, then he says, if they engage in devotional service and worship me with their hearts, so these are the personalities that will go back to Krishna. In the same chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, Krishna explains about, you know, all his opulences. And as he describes his opulence, you know, he talks about the persons that represent his opulence. And Lord Shiva is one of those persons that Krishna says that he is represented by Lord Shiva, right? Lord Shiva is like one of the opulences of Krishna. And so Lord Shiva has a very important role in the universe, in the universes. And so therefore many people tend to think that Lord Shiva is the supreme. However, Krishna explains throughout the Bhagavad Gita, even now, this 8th chapter is explaining who is really supreme, and that's Krishna. Now, people that worship Lord Shiva, you know, we don't want to be disrespectful, neither do we want to be critical. However, it is important to be able to express with knowledge. As you said, Dilan, you want to know. So by studying this Bhagavad Gita, as you're doing now, and reading those verses that explains Lord Shiva's position, then you will be able to speak with them with intelligence about Lord Shiva. Because Lord Shiva is the most dedicated devotee of Lord Krishna. Even when you see pictures of Lord Shiva, he has beads in his hand, right? He's a very, very dedicated Vaishnava. He's a Vaishnava. And so, yes, so we don't disturb the faith of those that are worshiping Lord Shiva. At the same time, it's important for us as bhakti yogis to have the knowledge to be able to explain to them. And that's in the Bhagavad Gita. Don't have to go too far away to learn about Lord Shiva. Okay?
Okay. Thank you so much. And I had a last question for me.
Okay. Hey, Alex, I'm just seeing Alex, this person from New York. No, New Jersey. Hey, he's on the call. That's so sweet. Okay, Dylan.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, Dylan.
Yeah, so my question was, how do you link astrology to Krishna consciousness? I know it sounds a bit weird, but a lot of times, if you read online, if you go to any temple, they will tell you that the reasons for different gods is because of astrology. Like, because I'm from Wembley right now, and maybe 10 minutes walk from my place, there's a massive, lovely temple. It's golden, so it's really nice. And if you go there, you will see like different statues, and a lot of times people will tell you, oh, I'm having issues with a specific god or like whatever, and then they will go do like special offerings. How do you link this to Krishna consciousness? Because if it's in a temple, it means it has its place. I believe so. Because if you go to a temple, you will see statues of Lord Shiva, you will see statues of Lord Rama, Lord Krishna, Lord Vishnu. So I believe that they're all in the temple for a specific reason. But how can you link astrology to Krishna consciousness?
So everything comes from Krishna. Everything, even astrology, right? There's nothing that's separate from Krishna. And you're absolutely right in that perception that everything has a place, That is so, it's such a non-judgmental mood of approaching God, which is really beautiful because everything does have a place. That's how Krishna is so kind that he provides for everyone according to their level of consciousness. Where they are, Krishna makes it available. If somebody wants to learn about, the universes and learn about the demigods and learn about astrology, he's the greatest astrologer. So he, even Krishna himself at birth, he had an astrologer that determined, to his parents who he was and what's going to happen. So it's not that anything is separate from Krishna. That's what's important to know. Nothing is separate from Krishna. However, when we are exploring spirituality, as you are, Diland, it's important to know, if I study astrology, what is my goal? Where do I end up? If I worship the demigods, what is my goal? If you worship Lord Shiva, you end up at the planet of Lord Shiva, which is great with the Kailash. Some people may want to go there. If we worship Krishna, we go to Goloka Vrindavan with Krishna, where we never come back to the material world. The challenge is with many of these different aspects of understanding Krishna is we, depending on what our goal is, we will come back to the material world. Goloka Vrindavan is guaranteed to not come back into these material realms. And that's the reason why the Vaishnavas worship Lord Krishna, because they understand that this material world is not a wonderful place in many ways to come to. It's full of miseries. And, we just take birth after birth after birth. So the reason a person to worship Krishna is so that they can start understanding how to become free from this dukkhalayam, this misery of the material world. And that is guaranteed by Krishna himself. That's why Arjuna is asking all these questions. And that's why you're asking those beautiful questions that you're asking, because you want to know, who is this? Why do we have to just worship Krishna? That's important for you because you are individual soul. In other words, where you are now in your journey is different from where I may be, or where B may be, where Alex is. So you need to be responsible for where you are. And where you are is right now inquiring about all these different aspects of Krishna. And it's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mother. We've not got any other questions, and I think given that we've only got just under half an hour, I think we can read the next verse, and Sharadi is going to kindly read us the verse 3.
Oh, she's phone is on. Wonderful.
Hare Krishna.
They got electricity back.
Hare Krishna. Can you hear me?
Haribol, yes, we can.
Okay. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the indestructible, transcendental, living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Atya Atma, the Self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruit of activities. Purport. Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman, there is Para-Brahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Para-Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the lord of matter. But in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. This is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. In Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jiva Atma and Brahman, but he is never called Para Brahman. The living entity, Jivatma, takes different positions. Sometimes he merges into the dark material nature and identifies himself with matter. And sometimes he identifies himself with the superior spiritual nature. Therefore, he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from one of the 8.4 million species of life, but in spiritual nature, he is only one body. In material nature, he is manifested sometimes as a man, demigod, animal, beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifice, yagya, but when his merit is exhausted, he returns to earth again in the form of a man. This process is called karma. The Chandogya Upanishad describes the Vedic sacrificial process. On the sacrificial altar, 5 kinds of offerings are made unto 5 kinds of fire. The 5 kinds of fire are conceived as the heavenly planets, clouds, the earth, man, and woman, and the 5 kinds of sacrificial offerings are faith, the enjoyer on the moon, rain, grains, and semen. In the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets, and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grains, and the grains are eaten by man, transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice and repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. Impersonalist commentators on the Bhagavad Gita unreasonably assume that Brahman takes the form of Jiva in the material world. And to substantiate this, they refer to chapter 15, verse 7 of the Gita. But in this verse, the Lord also speaks of the living entity as an eternal fragment of myself. The fragment of God, the living entity, may fall down into the material world, but the Supreme Lord, Achyuta, never falls down. Therefore, this assumption that the Supreme Brahma assumes the form of the Jiva is not acceptable. It is important to remember that in Vedic literature, Brahman, the living entity, is distinguished from Parabrahma, the Supreme Lord.
Thank you so much, Radha. Beautifully read. Mother, the stage is all yours.
Okay. So now the personality of Krishna, he's unmute. I have unmuted. Okay, yeah. So Krishna is now explaining to the answering the questions that Arjuna asked in the very first part of these texts. Text 1 and 2, there was questions that were being asked, and now Krishna is going to answer them. So Krishna is explaining this first question: what is Brahman? What is Brahman? And he says that, well, Brahman refers to the living entity, Aham Brahmasmi, and Param Brahman is referring to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore, for the Jiva to understand that they're Brahman, the living entities are Brahman, that means they're spirit souls. At the same time, Krishna is also referred to as Brahman, however, he's referred to as Param Brahman. So that is the understanding that Krishna is greater in terms of he's the original personality, and we are spirit Oh, you're still in darkness. Sardia. It reminds me, Sardia, of when I lived in Africa. I lived in Africa for almost 10 years. And while we were living there, I lived in West Africa and Central Africa. And actually also this is in India, when I'm in India too. The electricity just go out and there's just nothing you can do. You're like, just like, okay, this is it. You know, you just have to wait until Krishna decides to let somebody able to put back the light, to put the light back on. So yeah. Anyway, so the living entity is called Brahman. We, the living entity, we're called Brahman because we are eternal and we're indestructible. The spirit soul is indestructible, and we can read about that in chapter 2, which you've already read. And therefore, we have the same quality as the Lord, but not the same quantity, right? The quality is, Krishna is Sat Chit Ananda, and we are also Sat Chit Ananda, the qualities. However, not in the same quantity. That's why Krishna is Param Brahman, because his quantity is much greater. And this is why in the purport, Prabhupada is helping us to understand how to differentiate what is Brahman. Now, also the difference between material consciousness and spiritual consciousness. So material consciousness is, we're all trying to lord it over. I see Dylan laughing, right? As material consciousness, yeah, we all think that, you know, things are going on by us. We are the Lord of what we survey. Yeah, we are the controllers. It's going on because I've made it, I'm the one that's deciding. I decide my life, right? And to some degree we do, because we are spirit soul. We have choices to make decisions. At the same time, there is a difference between having material consciousness and spiritual consciousness. So in terms of karma, oh, you're not laughing, Dylan. Okay. In terms of karma, it is according to Bhagavad Gita, it is a varied creation of material bodies by the force of material consciousness. So with karma, then we understand that, you know, there's always a change in body based on our actions. And in spiritual consciousness, the purpose is to serve the Lord. That's our spirit. That's the actual nature of the living entity. That's our real nature. As Brahman, our real nature is to serve Krishna. Some people say they serve, you know, the demigods. Some people serve the sun. Some people serve the ocean. Some people, there's so many different aspects of who people may serve. However, the fact is that people do know, most people know, that our constitutional position is to be a servant, is to serve. And so whomever it is that, according to our level of consciousness, that we're choosing to serve, the ultimate in service is to the Supreme Person, which is Krishna. That's the ultimate in service. And yeah, you know, we sometimes as living beings, we identify with matter. We identify with matter, at least I can say for myself, I identify with matter most of the time, right? You know, I'm always thinking of this body and it aches and this and that. And, you know, am I gonna walk today? Am I not gonna walk? Am I gonna, you know, what? I'm always thinking of something like that relating to me and mine. So I identify, like, for example, you know, just identifying with nature, even though nature is an aspect of Krishna. Nature is very much, you know, a part of Krishna. Krishna manifests as nature. But sometimes we can really over-identify with nature, right? And then we can also identify with the superior nature. which is Krishna. If we are identifying with nature just for my enjoyment, that's one level of consciousness. If I'm identifying with nature because I'm just really appreciating the beauty that Krishna has created for us, all the colors here in this material world, it's just amazing what Krishna has done, then I'm actually spiritually thinking about the Supreme Lord. And so what happens when we identify with matter, then we have 8,400,000 species of bodies to look forward to, because that's what happens. 8,400,000 species of life on this planet, and we could be any one of those at any time if we just continue to identify with matter, because of transmigration, because of karma. And so yeah, so in this purport, it's really it's important to understand Krishna's viewpoint, how to take direct to Krishna consciousness and go back to Godhead. And Prabhupada, I think here it mentions in this verse something about the impersonalists. So that's something Srila Prabhupada talks about a lot. People that are impersonalists, that they identify, with the aspect of Krishna that's not personal. It's not a personal aspect. So they, here it's explained in Bhagavad Gita 15:7. That's where Prabhupada refers to. And it says here, 15:7. Actually, this chapter is the chapter that most devotees are reading this month, because this is a very spiritual month, Purushottam month, and it's recommended during this month to read the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So here we get a chance to read a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, from the 15th chapter. And Prabhupada says here, in the purport, Prabhupada is mentioning about the living beings. Anyway, it says the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. And due to conditioned life, they're struggling very hard with the six senses, which includes the mind. And so Prabhupada talks here about this conditioned life that we struggle so hard with. And so this verse is important to help us to understand how we are a part of Krishna. However, in our conditioned state, we struggle in this life. We're constantly struggling. And because we're constantly struggling, and because we have these choices where we could, let's say, worship all the way to the demigods, or even worship where we can go to Brahman, the impersonalists, they want to go into the Brahman effulgence of the Lord, they will eventually come back into the material world. So here, the focus on this third chapter is about the actual sacrifices that we make. So how important is that in relationship to the living entity, and the choices that we make? Let's see if there's any other thing in this purport. These purports are very technical in some ways. So, yeah.
Hare Krishna, Mata, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So in the purport, Prabhupada was explaining that, our position as the jivas, he said that we are Krishna's marginal energy. So because we're the marginal energy, we've got a choice of, where we're going to be, and that choice is determined by what we identify with. So my question is that, especially like in the last year, we've seen, I think growing amounts of protest and unrest where people feel that, certain groups are being discriminated against. And because of that discrimination and mistreatment, they feel a need, to stand up and to, to fight for change. So my question is, if we are, if we find ourselves in a position where we say, we have the body of a woman and now we feel there's serious discrimination against women and, we want to address it, how do we address such issues without over-identifying, with that external identity, whether that be our gender, our race, our nationality? Because on the one hand, I can see the need for addressing serious issues, but on the other hand, there seems to be a danger of over-identifying, with that external identity.
Yeah, you answered your question, Sardia. Yes, it's, okay, so there are activists, there's social activists, and there's spiritual activists. And so sometimes there's a fine line in being a social activist and maybe having some spiritual knowledge, or being a spiritual activist where a person is simply trying to help other people to understand, some of these truths that I hear in Bhagavad Gita. So in our individual development, in our individual growing, we may choose to become involved as social activists in the world. At the same time, as you said, Sardia, it's so important to always consciously remind ourselves that ultimately we are spiritual activists. We're spiritual activists for ourselves as individual, meaning that we are in the process of even ourselves becoming free from some of those material conditionings that we may have within our own self. What to speak of standing up for somebody else, right? And so first identifying with the fact that I'm a spiritual activist in the process of begging for grace and mercy to change my own consciousness. And then as we are becoming purified and as we are recognizing more and more and more who we are, then we can reach out as social activists to help people to understand more about who they are spiritually. So it's not, so sometimes those lines get crossed, right? However, it's not one or the other. It's that we can be social activists if we recognize who we really are. If we understand that we are servants of Krishna, at the end of the day, my designation, who I am, my constitutional position is that ultimately I am a servant of Krishna. If we decide to serve in a social atmosphere and forget that we're ultimately servants of Krishna, then we're actually cheating ourselves and we're cheating Krishna. Both. Because social activism is important. And for some people, Dylan asked these beautiful questions about, different people, doing different things. For some people, that consciousness of being fully engaged in social activism is where they may be at. That might be where they are in their journey. And, we can maybe influence some people by helping them by our actions. When they see our actions as lovers of Krishna, that can help some social activists. We can also help social activism by perhaps distributing prasadam, perhaps chanting, beautifully how we sing so beautifully. These can all be tools that can be used to assist in social activism. However, if we label ourselves as social activists, then we're kind of missing the point. We're missing, at least because we're practitioners of bhakti, right? We want to be bhakti yogis. We want to be Vaishnavas. We want to show the world, this Krishna philosophy, and we want to show that this Krishna philosophy is so alive, and this Krishna philosophy changed lives, and this Krishna philosophy makes a difference. Because it will make a difference, right? I mean, where can you go in the world and find an organization like we have where everyone in the, there's so much diversity Yes, there may be struggles with that diversity, no doubt, because you're coming from the conditioned source, conditioned world. However, people are coming together, recognizing that, okay, we have this diversity. Now let's take shelter of Krishna so that we can, become purified of all our material conditioning. And so, yeah, let's understand there's a differentiation between being a spiritual activist and a social activist. And, if we're going to cross the lines, then we always got to remember subtly in our consciousness that we are spiritual activists. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated that answer, and I really feel inspired by the idea of becoming a spiritual activist.
Yes, because then we change hearts, and then we give people an opportunity to not having to come back here, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I also appreciated your point that it's very important for us to see and understand, where other people are at, and to respect their path and their journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the collective. That's the collective in the world, right? The only way that's Krishna, right? Krishna is loving all of us. It doesn't matter, who we are, if we know, we don't know, if we turn to him. Krishna, of course, those that turn to him, he's so much more present for us. Just like in a family, if the child is more present to the parent may, reciprocate a little more, possibly. Now we have so many dysfunctional families, I'm not sure. However, in a functional family with Krishna as the center, Krishna is caring for all of his parts and parcels. Everyone is important, no matter where they are in their journey, because ultimately everyone will come to him eventually. Everyone will come to him. So we now, as we are aspiring and growing in our understanding of love, of ultimate love for Krishna, we are to demonstrate that in the world. So if we are ourselves having these kind of conditioning of having, I don't know, I guess some of the things that people are being socially active about in the world today, if we ourselves are not able to understand, oh yes, they're on a journey. I mean, some of us have been on that journey, and if we're not able to just kind of realize, this is a journey, what can I do? What can I do to help? What can I do? Not, my spiritual master always used to say, you're either giving your association or taking association. So we need to be conscious. Am I going to give my association, or am I going to take it from someone else? And if I am going to take it, then be conscious. When I take association, what is the goal of taking that association? When I give association, what is the goal of giving that association? Okay?
Thank you so much, Mother. I'm conscious we're supposed to be finishing the session at 8 o'clock. So I think I was going to suggest, I don't know, do you have any final thoughts to conclude the session? Because what I don't want to do is, you've so eloquently taken us through the last 3 verses. I just don't want it to be a rush job where we just kind of read it and just kind of don't elaborate. I just don't want to take that beauty away from it. So it's up to you, Mother. Either you can read the 4th verse and conclude the session, or I'm more than happy for you to give us another, few words of wisdom, and we can end the session there.
I'm going to check with Saradia and you, because you are the organizers. You let me know what to do, please. Whatever it is, I'm your servant.
Sharadia, what do you think? How's everybody for time?
Hare Krishna. Maybe, Mother Rajlila, we can just read the verse in the purport, and if you can just say that, 1 or 2 concluding words, so we finish say 10 past 8. I think that might be a good arrangement.
Let's do that. So Mother, you can read the verse, finish it, and then you can, make a few remarks.
Okay. Oh, best of the embodied beings, the physical nature, which is constantly changing, is called Adibhuta, the material manifestation. The universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods, like those of the sun and moon, is called Adidaiva. And I, the Supreme Lord, represented as the super soul in the heart of every embodied being, I'm called Adiyagya, this Lord of sacrifice. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The physical nature is constantly changing. Material bodies generally pass through 6 stages. They are born, they grow, they remain for some duration, they produce some byproducts, they dwindle, and they vanish. This physical nature is called Adibhuta. It is created at a certain point and will be annihilated at a certain point. The conception of the universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods and their different planets, is called Adidaivata. And present in the body along with the individual soul is super soul, a plenary representation of Lord Krishna. The super soul is called a Paramatma or Adiyagya and is situated in the heart. The word Ava is particularly important in the context of this verse because by this word, the Lord stresses that the Paramatma is not different from him. The super soul, the supreme personality of Godhead, seated beside the individual soul, is the witness of the individual soul's activities and is the source of the soul's various types of consciousness. The super soul gives the individual soul an opportunity to act freely and witness his activities. The functions of all these different manifestations of the Supreme Lord automatically become clarified for the pure Krishna conscious devotee engaged in transcendental service to the Lord. The gigantic universal form of the Lord called Adidaivata is contemplated by the neophyte who cannot approach the Supreme Lord in his manifestation as super soul. The neophyte is advised to contemplate the universal form or Virat Purusha, whose legs are considered the lower planets, whose eyes are considered the sun and moon, and whose head is considered the upper planetary systems. So this is Krishna. And in conclusion, it's important to know that what is called Adibhuta is Krishna's material manifestation, and we can see that manifestation all around us in this universe and other universes, other planetary systems. And the universal form of the Lord, which you can read in chapter 11. 11 gives us the full understanding of this universal form, which includes the demigods. So the demigods are a part of the body, the limbs of the Lord. And those, like those of the sun and moon, is called Adidaiva. So the sun and the moon, they also have demigods that takes care, that are in charge of them. And what's important is that the Supreme Lord is the super soul. He's the Adiyagya. He lives within us as super soul. He's the personality that we offer sacrifices to, and he's within our hearts, and he's waiting, just waiting for us to turn to him, just waiting. And as soon as we turn to him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then all of these things start becoming clear, and we don't need to focus on them. So this whole 8th chapter, believe it or not, is to help us to just recognize that these bodies that we have, they're so very temporary. And what we really do need to understand is what happens at the time of death. What's going to happen? How is it going to happen? And how will I turn to Krishna? So we need to get these other things out of the way so that we can understand who Krishna is. So Krishna is here in the heart, super soul, waiting for us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Mother. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And a special thanks, of course, goes to Mother Vraja for taking us so beautifully through the first 4 verses of the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So we do these sessions every week. So I see a few unfamiliar or new faces, should I say. So you guys are more than welcome to join us on Thursdays. We do this every week at 6:30. Honestly, Alex, Sachpriya, Devidasi, and Daniel, Nalini, thank you guys. for joining us, and hope you managed to take some little words of wisdom, and because I certainly always take a lot more from these sessions. So thank you everybody for taking part, and have a lovely rest of the day. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so very much.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, everyone.